of U.S. policy have not changed.
I don't think it's a major shift. I think it's a tactical shift.
I think at the end of the day, the United States is still looking for that concrete step, that commitment by the North.
Simply sitting down with the North, it can reduce misperceptions, miscalculations.
How important is the U.S. support to make inter-Korean summits to happen?
Well, I think U.S. support is important, but especially U.S. non-interference is important.
I don't think President Moon should simply accept the invitation and go meet with Kim Jong-un.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eunjung Cho. Vice President Pence, after visiting the Pyeongchang Olympics, indicated the U.S. is open to talks with North Korea. Secretary Tillerson also signaled readiness to hold preliminary talks with Pyongyang. Is the U.S. shifting its approach to North Korea?
The President's made it clear. He always believes in talking. But talking is not negotiation. Talking is understanding one another.
Any form of negotiation, determine whether the parties are in fact
North Korea must completely, verifiably, and permanently abandon its nuclear weapons program.
Now my guest today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation. He was a former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining me today is Mr. Robert Einhorn, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Mr. Einhorn was a former special advisor for non-proliferation and arms control at the State Department. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Bob, let me begin with you. The U.S. says it is now open to preliminary talks with North Korea. How much of a shift of stance is this?
I don't think it's a major shift. I think it's a tactical shift. Now the United States appears to be willing to enter into preliminary talks or exploratory talks or talks about talks. Various terms have been used. But it seems, and the President and Vice President have said in recent days, that before formal negotiations can begin, the North must meet certain preconditions. In particular, the North must commit to complete denuclearization. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the North is going to make that commitment. So yes, a tactical shift, but whether this shift gets us to real negotiations on North Korea's nuclear program, that's an open question.
Mm-hmm. Frank, has the tone changed a lot in Washington? Just recently, the U.S. has been emphasizing only maximum pressure on North Korea and was considering limited strike on North Korea.
I think the tone has shifted a bit, and I think that President Moon's initiative in North-South relations is largely responsible for that shift in tone. But I agree with Bob that the basic fundamentals of U.S. policy have not changed. Openness to talks about talks, communication channels, even a willingness perhaps to sit down with the North and scope out what actual negotiations would look like. I think that flexibility is most welcome, but I think at the end of the day, the United States is still looking for that concrete step, that commitment by the North that denuclearization is the agreed end goal, and that's an awfully high bar. I do think the U.S. here is trying to get out of the way of President Moon a bit, and I think that shows some coordination with Seoul. Lee Iacocca, the U.S. auto executive, once said that you should either lead, follow, or get out of the way, and maybe the United States is trying to get out of the way here.
Bob, hearing this week, there are two senators and Ambassador Susan Thornton said there's no bloody no strategy considered in the Trump administration. How should we interpret this? Does this mean that the Trump administration is not considering limited strike against North Korea?
When there's a lot of smoke, there's probably some fire. And clearly there are those in the administration, I think in particular in the White House, who've expressed support for the so-called bloody nose strategy. A limited attack, perhaps an attack against North Korean missile launch facilities, something like that. The rationale is that this would show U.S. resolve. It would signal possibly larger scale attacks, and it could persuade Kim Jong-un that this is a dangerous game. He better give up his nuclear weapons. And I think proponents of this view believe that if we attacked the North in a limited way, they would only respond in a limited way or not at all. But I think there's a lot of opposition to this view. I think many in the Pentagon, in the State Department, do not support a bloody nose strategy. They believe that this could lead to uncontrolled escalation. And if the U.S. engage in a limited strike without the support of the South Korean government, this could lead to a tremendous rupture in the U.S.-ROK military alliance. So I think now support for a bloody nose strike has really decreased. I don't think it's a real live possibility.
At the State Department, Secretary Tillerson mentioned talks back in December. So is this an idea that's been long considered within the government?
I think in certain parts of the government, especially the State Department, there's the view that we ought to sit down without preconditions. Let's explore various possibilities. Let's see if they're prepared to consider denuclearization. And if not, what else are they prepared to consider? I think this is a sound approach. And as Frank said before, simply sitting down with the North, it's a channel of communication. It can reduce misperceptions, miscalculations. I think it's valuable in its own right. So I think it's a positive thing.
Frank, President Moon is taking the lead in conciliatory approach to North Korea, and he vows to be in the driver's seat. So how does the U.S. government view President Moon's initiative?
Well, it is the Korean Peninsula, not the U.S. Peninsula. So I think it's appropriate that essentially our South Korean allies should lead and help to orchestrate efforts to engage the North. But there's a problem that President Moon faces, which is that the security dilemma, the core of the conflict between North Korea and the United States over the nuclear weapons is not something that South Korea can resolve by itself. So at some point, the United States has to be there dealing with the North alongside the South in order to address those really hard issues. And I think that while taking the bloody nose strategy, I think people began to understand it was going to be a bloody mess strategy, and they are moving away from that. I think that putting force on the table was not necessarily a bad move by the Trump administration. I think you have to have a credible coercive measures, military, economic, political, diplomatic isolation, sometimes to energize diplomacy. But I think the more they looked at that particular idea, the worse it appeared, and the closer analysis showed them that was going to be a terrible way to go.
Bob, how does the U.S. government view President Moon's initiative?
I think the Trump administration is a bit wary of that initiative. It's a bit suspicious. It's concerned that President Moon's reaching out to the North could lead to a relaxation of sanctions. And I think that's the main fear, that it'll create a mood of good feeling, and that this will lead to a reduction in the maximum pressure campaign. I think the Trump administration is right in wanting to continue maximum pressure. I think what the challenge will be for President Moon to pursue a constructive North-South strategy without at the same time undermining the value of maximum pressure. Because without maximum pressure, there will not be serious negotiations.
When mentioning about North Korea, U.S. government officials are emphasizing not only alliance with South Korea, but also with Japan. Frank, why is this?
Well, look, any U.S. Approach to the North needs to be closely coordinated with both Japan and South Korea. And the reality is that even the U.S. military capabilities in the Far East are rooted in both South Korea and Japan. And Prime Minister Abe has been skeptical of engagement. He's been closely aligned with President Trump's pressure strategies. So I think the U.S. has always tried to keep its allies on the same page. Back in the Clinton administration, there was a trilateral coordinating group. In the Bush administration, they continued these efforts to try to make sure that the three allies would be on the same page. It's never easy, and especially it's difficult when you have some political alignments that are not in sync. But I think right now, President Trump is looking to Prime Minister Abe to essentially buck up President Moon and make sure that he doesn't give away the store, that in pursuing North-South relations, he doesn't undermine UN sanctions that are important to the pressure that the U.S. hopes will bring about a change of attitude in North Korea.
Before we go, what's going to happen from now ahead? Joint military exercises are planned for April. So will the joint exercises be a deal breaker in inter-Korean talks? First Bob and then Frank.
I don't think there'll be a deal breaker. The exercises were postponed to make way for the Olympics and to create a good atmosphere for the Olympics. But I'm very confident that they will go on in April. My concern is that Kim Jong-un will use the exercises as a pretext to resume provocative activities, in particular to resume testing of ICBM range missiles. And if he does that, I think this is going to create another tense situation. And it may make it difficult, certainly, to have U.S. North Korean exploratory talks. Hopefully, it will not derail inter-Korean talks. Hopefully, that will be able to go forward.
Bob's concern is very valid. I'm slightly more optimistic. I think that the North-South momentum may carry us through the spring exercises without a resumption of North Korean missile and nuclear testing. I certainly hope that's the case, because if not, as Bob says, we could be right back where we started with escalating tension and even the threats again of limited U.S. military action in response to a potential North Korean nuclear test or missile test.
We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next topic. South Korean President Moon Jae-in is invited to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. This invitation sets up the possibility for the third inter-Korean summit after 2000 and 2007. Now, Frank, how important is the U.S. support to make inter-Korean summits to happen?
Well, I think U.S. support is important, but especially U.S. non-interference is important. The United States needs to lend at least its rhetorical support to efforts to reduce tension north-south. I think President Moon, in a very encouraging move for Washington, has not just run off to Pyongyang immediately. He's given a kind of a conditional acceptance of an invitation for a summit, but he's said that a lot of things need to be worked out, including whether or not the North will sit down with the United States to talk about security issues. And they've also left the venue of the summit a little bit ambiguous. You know, 2 summits have been held in Pyongyang. Why shouldn't this third summit be in Jeju-do or Seoul? So I think President Moon wants U.S. Not to be afraid that he's going to somehow undermine the pressure and engagement strategy of the administration. And so far, he's sent some pretty encouraging signs that he's not going to be overeager and he's not going to take too soft a line.
I just want to add to that. This is, if there is a summit, it will be a very important event. I don't think President Moon should simply accept the invitation and go meet with Kim Jong-un. I think it's very important that these summits, and not just North-South summits, U.S.-Russian summits, all of these summits should be well prepared. I think a sensible counterproposal would be to say, yes, in principle, I support having a summit-level meeting, but let's prepare effectively for that meeting. I think there'll be a concern that he would go there without preparations, and essentially the summit would be hijacked by North Korean propaganda.
The beauty of that approach, Bob, I completely agree, is that that way you can even show to the North, look, previous summits have had some wonderful promises. How much have they really delivered? Right. And so you say to the North, this time we're serious, and we want to make sure we get real results.
Exactly.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned about agenda. So what should be the goals of the potential third Inter-Korean summit?
To improve communications, reduce tensions. There is a North-South agenda, traditional agenda, family reunions, humanitarian measures. I think there can be some confidence-building steps. One idea that's been discussed between North and South is confidence building in the West Sea. Avoid some of the mishaps that have happened in maritime areas. And also preparing the way, hopefully, for U.S. and North Korean direct conversations. I don't think the North is really prepared to talk about nuclear issues with South Korea, but South Korea could help facilitate that process getting underway.
Frank, what is the biggest lesson that we can take away from previous Inter-Korean summits?
Well, look, I think one of the lessons is that you should not give something for nothing. The Sunshine Policy was a very well-intentioned policy, but I think it gave away too much and got too little. So reciprocity is an important principle that should be adhered to at this summit. I agree with Bob that there should be an effort made to address at least some security issues. West Sea would be a great one. DMZ management and respect for the armistice is another. Reestablishing regular military communications across the DMZ at Panmunjom would be very important. But I think that previous summits have often overpromised and underdelivered. So this time around, why don't we try to flip that equation, sort of underpromise and overdeliver. I think it would be better for confidence all the way around.
We'll end this conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now, time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is a picture of tourists taking selfies with North Korean cheering squad in the background. The choreographed performances have grabbed attention at the Pyeongchang Olympics. Not everybody is amused, and some give skeptical glances. Frank, what is your reaction to this picture?
Well, it's good that the North Koreans came to the Olympics, and I guess my only complaint is that they didn't send enough people. I would have preferred to see a 5,000 person troupe of cheerleaders, because the more North Koreans who are exposed to life in the South, who are given a warm welcome by South Korean citizens, have a chance to see South Korea and enjoy a little taste of the freedoms that South Koreans enjoy, the better. They're going to go back to North Korea and share what they've learned. Hopefully they'll share some good pictures and some friendly memories. But people are right to be a little skeptical about these orchestrated cheer squads.
Bob?
What's been impressive to me is that there's a generational divide in South Korea on how people react to the North participating in the Olympics. The older generation, I think, welcome this. Some of them remember the days when the peninsula was unified. They would like to reach out to the North and achieve some kind of reconciliation. The younger generation doesn't have that experience. They don't know what a unified Korea is like. They believe that things have evolved in two very different directions, that this country in the North, they're not part of us. They're a separate country. They will remain a separate country forever. That's the view among many South Koreans. And these South Koreans, the younger ones, were very upset when President Moon allowed the North Koreans to have a place on the women's ice hockey team. Here are these South Korean girls who've been, dedicating their entire lives to this important moment. And now they've been kicked off the team. So this really, I'm impressed with how how differently people of different ages are reacting to the Olympics.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Bob, Frank, thank you for coming.
Thank
you
you.
very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from VOA, and I'm Eun Jung Cho. Thank you for watching.